In a typical American neighborhood, the streets are wide and clean, with perfect houses and magazine-worthy lawns. But strangely, there is no one around. There are no children flying kites, neighbors chatting at the gate, or anyone walking their dogs. Silence reigns, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower or an automatic sprinkler system watering the garden. The feeling is almost like being in a movie, one of those where the population has mysteriously disappeared. You look around and think, where is everyone? For those coming from Latin countries or the vibrant life of European cities, this emptiness can be unsettling. In most countries, for example, this calm sounds artificial. We are used to hearing car horns, the egg seller, dogs barking, and even loud music from neighbors composing the soundtrack of urban life. But why is this? What is the mystery behind the deserted streets in the United States? Do Americans not like to leave their homes? Are they afraid of something? Today, Bello Mundo will tell you why in so many places in the United States, you hardly see a soul walking down the street. Number 1. History. To understand why so many streets in the United States are empty, we need to go back a few decades. Shortly after World War II, the country experienced a rare economic boom, with factories full, credit abundant, and millions of families aiming for the same dream: home ownership. At that time, the value of a house seemed almost like a gift. It cost, on average, the equivalent of 2 years' salary for an average worker, something that sounds like fiction today when compared to the current reality, where that figure exceeds 8 times the average annual income. The government encouraged this transformation with affordable financing for veterans, friendly interest rates, and an avalanche of advertising selling the so-called American way of life. The concept of the planned suburb was born, neighborhoods far from city centers, with spacious houses and private gardens. Unlike European countries where many people lived in apartments or houses close to each other, Americans developed a model that was the opposite. And here's a curious detail. While the United States was betting on sprawling suburbs, war-torn Europe was following a completely different path. Countries such as Germany and France rebuilt their cities while maintaining dense, walkable centers, with apartments, shops, and offices sharing the same blocks. It was a matter of necessity. Limited resources required maximum use of space. But it was also culture, as Europeans had always lived in compact cities, where life took place on the streets, in cafes, and in squares. The American model seemed too strange to them. How could you live so far from everything? How could you not see your neighbors? The American answer to all these questions is the car. In the United States, the model was designed for the middle and upper classes, a symbol of status and comfort with low population density. The government invested heavily. It facilitated financing, subsidized home purchases, and accelerated the construction of interstate highways, forming a web of asphalt that connected these neighborhoods to the heart of the cities. It was the beginning of the greatest urban experiment of the 20th century, and it would shape not only the geography of the United States, but also the culture and behavior of entire generations. Number 2. Car culture. But the history of empty suburbs cannot be explained by urban planning alone. It has a lot to do with something that has become almost a religion in the United States: a passion for cars. Since the 50s, driving wasn't just a way to get around. It was a symbol of freedom, independence, and success. Advertisements at the time sold much more than cars. They sold dreams. Smiling families cruising down endless highways, young people conquering the world on 4 wheels, the car as an extension of one's personality. For Americans, getting a driver's license at 16 became a true rite of passage, almost as important as graduation. While in many countries driving is seen as a serious responsibility that comes with maturity, in the United States it has become synonymous with teenage freedom. This culture was fueled by the automotive industry itself, which became one of the country's greatest economic forces. Detroit, Motor City, didn't just produce vehicles, it produced a mindset. TV commercials, Hollywood movies, country music, everything conspired to make the car the heart of American life. And it worked so well that, even today, many Americans would rather spend 2 hours in traffic than take a 15-minute bus ride. It's a cultural issue, not just a practical one. Number 3. Zoning codes and anti-pedestrian urban planning. Remember when we talked about the construction of interstate highways? Well, that's only half the story. The other pillar that shaped life in the suburbs was the so-called zoning code, a set of rules that determines exactly what can exist in each part of the city. When the suburbs began to gain popularity in the post-war period, they were sold as the embodiment of the American dream. It was like stepping into a 50s TV commercial. Large houses with different but equally well-kept facades, green backyards where children could play, and immaculate gardens that served as the family's calling card. Surrounding them were recreational areas such as parks, sports courts, and squares, and commerce was concentrated in large shopping malls, a novelty at the time, which brought markets, stores, and services together in one place. But there was one fundamental detail. None of this was really close to home. The market was miles away, the school was in another direction, and the hospital was even further away. Walking to these places was not only time-consuming, it was impractical. Sidewalks were rare, and when they did exist, they were narrow and had no shade. Bicycles were seen more as a weekend leisure activity than a daily means of transportation. Functional zoning divided the city like a chessboard. Housing on one side, commerce on the other, industry far away. On paper, it looked organized. In practice, it created neighborhoods that were beautiful to look at, but where living without a car was practically impossible. Number 4. Anti-pedestrian urban planning. If zoning laws had already created a physical distance between home, commerce, and work, the design of American neighborhoods ended up completing the perfect scenario for keeping people away from walking. Many suburbs were designed as veritable mazes of residential streets with no exits, connected by a few wide avenues. This brought tranquility, after all, less through traffic, but it also meant that to get anywhere, you had to travel enormous distances. In most of these neighborhoods, you could walk dozens of blocks without finding a bakery, a grocery store, or a cafe. In many countries, it is common to have markets, cafes, and small shops scattered throughout the streets, encouraging people to walk and talk. In the American suburbs, however, this street life is practically non-existent. There is nowhere to go on foot, nor any reason to stroll around the neighborhood. Another point is the infrastructure itself. Have you ever thought about living in a place without sidewalks? In the United States, this is not only possible, but relatively common. Many subdivisions were built without them because the idea was simple. Everyone would drive. Wide streets, few crosswalks, and when there are sidewalks, they can end abruptly or be so narrow and poorly maintained that they end up serving only as decoration. The result is that even short trips, 1 or 2 kilometers, end up being made by car. And it's not just for convenience, but also for safety. After all, if there are no sidewalks or if it doesn't seem safe, people won't walk, even if their destination is nearby. And this isn't just an impression. When we look at the numbers, the size of the difference becomes clear. In the United States, only about 12% of all trips are made without a car. Now, compare that to countries like the United Kingdom, France, or Germany, where more than 20% of trips are made on foot. The disparity is so great that it puts Americans, along with New Zealand, at the bottom of the list among developed countries. It's proof that cities weren't designed for people to occupy the streets, but rather for everything to revolve around cars. And that's where the paradox lies. On the outside, these neighborhoods look like paradise, safe, organized, beautiful. But on the inside, it's a place where there is minimal interaction, where the street is almost a stage, not a living space. This becomes even more evident when we look at one group in particular: children. Because for them, this paradise can turn into a prison. Number 5. Childhood locked up. In the 50s, half of American children walked or rode their bikes to school. The scene was so common that it became almost a symbol of the movies and commercials of the time. Rows of bikes parked at the school door, groups of friends walking together on the sidewalks, backpacks on their backs and chatting along the way. Today, this reality has virtually disappeared. Less than 15% of students commute without a car, even in neighborhoods considered extremely safe. And the curious thing is that it's not because of a lack of space. In the suburbs, there is plenty of green space, plenty of parks, plenty of sports fields. Entire neighborhoods were planned with families in mind, with clean and well-maintained parks, ready to welcome children running around. But in practice, these places are empty. The reason goes far beyond laziness or the popularity of video games. In the suburbs, schools are rarely close to home. The journey may involve crossing wide avenues, walking along streets without sidewalks, or simply walking miles to reach their destination. Without efficient public transportation and with an urban layout that favors only cars, parents see no other option but to drive their children every day. And there is another important detail. Child supervision laws in the United States are much stricter than in most countries. A parent can be sued or even arrested for letting a young child go to the park or walk to school alone. There are famous cases of neighbors who called the police when they saw children playing unattended, even a few meters from home. In 2014, a mother in South Carolina was arrested for letting her 9-year-old daughter play alone in the park while she worked at McDonald's next door. The child was safe. The park was visible from her mother's workplace, but that didn't matter. The law considered it neglect. In many U.S. states, children under the age of 12 cannot be left home alone, even for a few minutes. Compare this to countries such as Germany or Denmark, where 6-year-olds ride their bikes to school alone, or Japan, where it is common to see groups of young children using public transportation without adult supervision. The difference is striking. This excessive protection has created a generation of young people who have grown up without spatial autonomy. They don't know their own neighborhood. They don't know how to find their way around without GPS. They haven't developed the confidence that comes from exploring the world on their own. Psychologists already point out that this lack of independence in childhood can cause anxiety and insecurity in adulthood. It's as if the paradise of the suburbs has become a golden cage, beautiful to look at, but limiting the natural development of children. The result? Children's independence has been virtually eliminated. They spend most of their time at home, alternating between schoolwork and screens. Without the habit of walking, cycling, or getting around on their own, they grow up less physically active and more socially isolated. While in a country like Brazil, for example, it is still common to see groups of children playing in the streets until nightfall, and in Europe, the squares are full of families and young people. In the American suburbs, the street is not a place to meet. It is just the space between the garage and the parent's car. And this dependence on the car goes far beyond childhood. It shapes adult life. Number 6. The price. If it is already clear that living in these large residential areas, far from city centers, guarantees comfort, it is also time to talk about the cost of maintaining this lifestyle. And we are not just talking about money, but also time, energy, and even social relationships. The most obvious expense is financial. In neighborhoods like these, life without a car is practically impossible. And we're not talking about a single vehicle. In many families, especially those with teenage children, it is common to have 2 or even 3 cars at their disposal. This is because, unlike in many countries, you can get your driver's license at 16. And for many young people, driving is not just a privilege, but a necessity for studying, working, or having fun. Maintaining this family fleet is not cheap. Fuel, insurance, maintenance, taxes, tires, and parking consume, on average, more than 20% of household income, making it the second largest expense in the budget, behind only housing. And there is a cost even more valuable than money: time. The average American spends more than an hour a day in traffic, which means almost 300 hours a year, the equivalent of spending more than a whole week just commuting. It's as if every resident of these regions worked an extra month every year, but without getting paid for it. And for the government, maintaining this lifestyle is also expensive. Building and maintaining roads, bridges, and overpasses to connect scattered neighborhoods is much more expensive than investing in public transportation or dense, walkable neighborhoods. Each kilometer of suburban road costs millions of dollars to pave, and even more to maintain over the years. It is a model that depends on huge subsidies, paid for by all taxpayers, to sustain a lifestyle that in practice benefits those who can afford to live in the suburbs. These long distances even shape eating and social habits. It is not uncommon for families between appointments and traffic jams to opt for quick meals at fast food chains, simply because cooking at home requires planning and free time that are not always available. In cities such as Valencia or Seville, Spain, urban centers remain lively and accessible, with markets, pharmacies, and schools just a few minutes' walk away. In the American suburbs, the equation is different: space and security in exchange for money, time, and often social life. Number 7. The future. The good news is that Americans themselves have begun to question the model they created. In several cities, experiments are underway with so-called walkable neighborhoods, also known as 15-minute neighborhoods, which are areas where most daily needs can be met within a few minutes of walking or cycling. Portland, Seattle, and Austin are already redesigning entire sections to allow for a mix of commerce and residential areas, something that was unthinkable for a long time in remote residential complexes. In other regions, investment is going toward quality public transportation and bike lanes, creating safe routes that reduce total dependence on cars. The challenge, however, is enormous. You can't change 7 decades of urban planning overnight. Distances remain long, streets were built for vehicles, and a considerable portion of the population still prefers the comfort and privacy of this lifestyle, even with the high costs and sense of isolation. Still, perceptions are changing. More and more people understand that living on empty streets without community life and spending excessive time and money on commuting comes at too high a price. The younger generations, more concerned with sustainability and quality of life, are beginning to push for cities that encourage human contact and reduce car dependence. Ultimately, what we see is a country rethinking the way it occupies its spaces. The emptiness of the streets is no accident. It was planned, and that changes everything in the way we interpret what we see. Americans are not gone. They are inside their cars, their homes, their shopping malls. For those arriving from outside, the impression is that the city is silent. But in fact, it continues to function, only behind the curtains, leaving the stage, which is the streets, almost always empty. And that's it for today. Now that you know what lies behind this apparent mystery, tell us, could you live in a place like this, with all this silence in the streets? Or do you prefer neighborhood life, with movement, noise, and people around? Now tell us, what surprised you the most? Take advantage and sign up here at Bello Mundo, because every week there is a new video with powerful stories that are curious and often invisible to the eyes of most people. See you next time.